Initiative, an ode to the past and not the future, a collection of Arab dress and adornment, celebrating human narrative.
Friends of the Zay, creative advisors, and our guests literally from around the world, from Saudi Arabia, New Jersey, Leiden, Germany, the UK, and Indonesia, I'm delighted to welcome you all this evening from where I am in Dubai, or this morning from where you are in America. I'm absolutely delighted to be able to welcome you to the final webinar in our 6th series on dialogues on the art of Arab fashion. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Emma Farmer, COO of the Zay Initiative. Some very quick housekeeping. We encourage you to use the chat function and let us know where you're all from, and to add your thoughts about the presentation and discussion as we go through. As ever, at the end, we'll allow some time for Q&A. So please add your questions to the Zoom Q&A function. All our sessions are recorded and sent to registered participants within 24 hours of the event. As we continue to work in this virtual world to bring together our community, I think there are a few people having issues with the sound, but I'm hoping everyone is now back. Brilliant. Okay, great. As we continue to work in this virtual world to bring together our community, once again, for all our friends of the Zay and creative advisors, directly following the session, we will host the behind the scenes. This is open mic for us all to connect. If you are not yet a friend, but would like to join this session, please do drop a note in the chat to Catherine and she will assist you. I'm going to hand straight over to Dr. Reem El Mutwalli. Dr. Reem.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our session. What a year we've had. I'm still in awe of what we have managed to accomplish. As we mark our last webinar in our 6th series, I would like to thank each one and every one of you for your support to the Zay Initiative, without which we cannot exist. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope it was entertaining and informative. For the benefit of those who join us for the first time, we usually start by explaining. Our name originates from the Arabic term Zay. Zay literally means the costume and general attire of certain country or era. And why do we choose the Arabic language? Because the Zay Initiative is concerned with the legacy of the Arab world. Simply put, we at the Zay Initiative collect the tangible to narrate the intangible. We collect artifacts to help record the stories of those who used or wore them. Some of you might wonder, what do we mean when we mention the Arab world? I always like to explain that an Arab is a cultural trait rather than a racial one. Not all Arabs are Muslims, nor all Muslims are Arabs. The Arab world is full of rich and diverse communities, ethnicities, religions, groups, and cultures. The Arab world is full of the Arab world includes Muslims, Christians, Jews, Yazidis, Kurds, Amazigh, Berber, and other minorities. Differences do exist not only among the countries, but within countries as well. There are over 200 million Arabs worldwide, and generally, anyone who adopts the Arabic language is typically called an Arab. So we come to the introduction of our guest, and how can I introduce Dr. Gillian? She is an icon in the textile world. We can do a whole webinar and not cover her accomplishments or list the track of her records. But briefly, She is the textile archaeologist and expert, director of the Textile Research Centre in Leiden, the Netherlands. She is a specialist in Middle Eastern embroidery, textiles, and dress. She worked for many years as a textile archaeologist in Egypt before turning to more recent aspects of Middle Eastern dress. She is the author of the Encyclopedia of Embroidery from the Arab World, published by Bloomsbury, and we will tell you more about that in a few minutes. But on a personal note, as far as the ZAY initiative is concerned, she was our first supporter, to the extent that she flew down to Dubai with her wonderful husband, spent a whole weekend with me, just to sit down, mentor me, help me make decisions, to create the ZAY initiative, and constantly giving me much needed hugs to help lift my spirits. I couldn't have done it without you, Dr. Gillian. I proudly say that she is a ZAY creative advisor, and I welcome you to our talk today.
Thank you. That was quite an introduction. I'm going,
No,
but it was a fun weekend. It really was.
Yeah, it was lovely, and I know you were, how can I say, channeling, taking away all the anxiety and nervousness that I had, and you helped me structure everything and understand the larger picture, which was wonderful. I can't thank you enough for it.
My pleasure. And don't worry, there's plenty more hugs to come.
Yes, I hope so.
That's, I think, yeah.
So you started,
So
you wanted
would you
us
like
to
me
start with, yes, sorry.
with Widad?
Yes.
Yes, definitely. I wanted to start with Widad. She is the most amazing woman. She's a wonderful teacher, a friend, and I miss her dearly in these troubled times, because you can just sit there and talk with her and she'll explain and it makes sense. And she is such a calm presence, and her deep desire to make people understand how important textiles are, how important embroidery is. And it's part of the soul of everybody. And just sitting, talking with her is total inspiration. And if anybody deserves a sainthood, and Widad is Christian, it is Widad Kawa, for all of the work
So
she has been doing over the decades.
So true.
Yeah.
Which takes us to this.
Yes.
The work that you've done here, I wanted you to just start us by why. What got you into this?
Basically, I can't remember when I wasn't involved with embroidery. As a child, I had always pieces of textiles in my hand. I'd made dolls' clothes. I was embroidering, and I was totally fascinated with embroidery. And then at one point, I decided I was going to become an archaeologist. And then on my 17th birthday, I had my tonsils out. And that gave me 2 weeks' time off school to think, what did I really want to do? And I decided, much to the horror of my parents, that I wanted to become a professional embroideress. And so I totally changed course in school, which everybody did and allowed. And then I applied to become a professional embroideress and was rejected on the grounds I was overqualified and under-imaginative. But it actually was a good thing. I then studied design history and specialized in textile and costume history, and within that specialized in embroidery history. So I have both the historical side and the technical side, and that forms the basis of much of my work, this interest in both sides and putting them together. And then I had a chance many years ago to do embroidery from the Arab world, putting into practice what I had learned as a textile archaeologist in Egypt. And at the same time, I was asked by Berg if I would do an encyclopedia for them, part of a big series on Central and Southwest Asia, the Central Asian, Middle Eastern, etc. And to my horror, I discovered I loved writing encyclopedias.
Why horror?
Well, it's not something you expect, is it? You know, what's your profession? I write encyclopedias. That's enough to put anybody off. But it's a wonderful it's a wonderful way of learning things and concentrating and then moving on. And my mind doesn't go to a sharp point, it goes that way and sometimes that way. I like seeing connections. I like understanding why. I want to know the stories behind, the context, the narrative. And writing encyclopedias give me that opportunity. So it's by accident, and yet, is it?
And you worked on the embroidery from the Arab world, which begs the question, is there such a thing as embroidery or Arab embroidery?
No.
Can you
Which shocks people when I say that. Well, my main problem is there are so many different types of embroidery. Which one is the Arab embroidery? It doesn't exist. Okay. There are at least 150 different styles of embroidery. There are over 200 different stitches used. I'll come back to that in a minute. So there is no such one item that can be classed as typically Arab. There are so many variations, and that's what makes it so fascinating. And that's why some years ago, in fact, in 2009, I decided I was going to take a gentle walk through all of the countries of the Arab League and do a book, a really in-depth book on history and types of embroidery from the Arab world, going from the Western Sahara through to Tunisia and then on to the Arab Peninsula. And that led me into talking with Bloomsbury, who had taken over Berg, to see if it was possible to do an encyclopedia of embroidery from the Arab world. And they said, well, why only one book? Let's make it into a series. So, okay. And with the help of many people, it's not just me who's written this. But what we did, which is slightly different, is I wrote everything, because that saves an awful lot of time in editing. So you have problems of getting the same style, the same level, the same range of information you wanted. People not writing the article you'd ask them to write, or people not handing in the articles. All of that is gone. But what we made sure was that every chapter was read by a specialist. That saved them time and it saved us time, and we got consistency. But people like Widad Laipeo, Caroline Stone, unbelievable help and generosity of people. And we wanted to make it so that we talk to a lot of people, not just reading academic books or going to museums, but actually talking with the people making the embroidery. And that's what we did. And we had a slight problem, because when we were in Tunisia with a friend of mine, we heard noises in the street, but we ordered a lot of embroidery. We bought a lot of too much embroidery, and planned to go back later in the year. We got back to Holland, and the next day, the Arab Spring broke out in the street where our hotel was in Tunis. Yeah, we were that close. Then I went to Cairo and to Tahrir, and the demonstrations in Cairo. And then I went to Amman, and there were demonstrations in Amman. Just hang on a minute. But Bloomsbury, Bloomsbury. So I wrote and I wrote and I wrote with Widad and everybody else. And Bloomsbury declared it a special because of the situation in the Middle East. And so instead of 300 pages with 300 illustrations, It ended up 700 pages with 800 illustrations, with the aim of getting as much information down on paper as possible for future generations. And what happened then was a big surprise to everybody. The book came out in 2016, and in 2017, we were given the Dartmouth Medal, which was something I'd never heard of.
Yes.
Yeah, but it turned out, and it is actually an unbelievable honor. It is rarer than the Nobel Prize.
Wow.
It is given to one book per year, written in the English language, published anywhere in the world on any subject. And in 2017, a book on Arab embroidery won the Dartmouth Medal.
Fantastic.
That is an amazing fact.
Yes. And I
It
don't
shows-
think many people know that.
No, if it had been a Nobel Prize, the whole world would have heard of it, because it doesn't come with the money. It doesn't come with the fanfare. Very few people actually know this book has won this amazing award. But it has opened so many doors in the academic world. And more importantly, it has led to the study of embroidery and the study of textiles being more accepted within the academic world. So it is a major event. It's
Anyway,
just nobody realizes it.
It's what an achievement. I'm really in awe of it, and I think we will take our audience through. Maybe start with the background information.
Yeah. The book is divided into 3 sections. There's background information, archaeological and historical evidence, and then regional evidence. And with the background information, we wanted to provide information about the materials, the threads, the tools, the equipment, the designs, and the people who made it and how they made it and why embroidery is made. So that was concentrating on that side, and it's historical and modern examples.
And
Yeah.
was there a thread of embroidery that was carried across the board, or no, each embroidery is different?
In general, types of material and some stitches are universal. But what the people do with the thread, with the stitches, is different in different parts of the Arab world. That's what makes it fun. So in Tunisia, for example, just looking at some of the different types of metal thread. And what you often find in books written for the European Western market is gold thread has to be put on the surface of the cloth. Somebody forgot to tell them in the Arab world. And the gold thread is actually pushed, in many cases, through the cloth. So you're getting open work and you're getting details. It's just in one country like Tunisia, the range of techniques are amazing. The weight, the color, the light effect. And that is something people tend to forget, is how important light is on the embroidery. And you have to look at embroidery with, okay, what are the light conditions?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? Why is it so important?
Well, when you have the light in Northern Europe, it's pretty gray most of the time. And so the colors that are used tend to be more subdued. If you buy a garment in the Middle East, intended for bright light, the colors are more intense, which is often why people buy a garment, say in Dubai, take it home and think, why did I buy this? I can't wear this. And it's the same for the embroideries. So the color schemes and reflection, especially with the metalwork embroidery, is very important.
Which takes us to this one, which I love, and I can't wait for you to explain it to people because it's so fascinating.
When people are talking about Middle Eastern embroidery, they often mean Palestinian embroidery, and they mean cross-stitch. Well, actually, cross-stitch for that area of the world is a late 19th century development. And also, what is cross-stitch? And nowadays there are at least 5 different ways of making a cross stitch. And you've got to think, is it going to be that form of cross stitch or that form of cross stitch as well, a horizontal or a diagonal? And how it is made can give you an indication of where the embroidery comes from, because it's become localized. But so you've got 2 different elements here. One, cross stitch equals Arab embroidery. No, it's part of, but it's not the only thing. And then technically, how it is made, it tells you, or can tell you, where it comes from. But you've got to look on the back of the cloth to find out how it was done. And that's why with these diagrams, we've put working methods front and back, so that you can properly identify it. And while doing the encyclopedia, we actually came across 210 different stitches or combination of stitches. So cross stitch is only a very small part of the whole story.
Fascinating. And these are done organically? Because I know that I remember when Sitwidad was talking to us how important it was for her to document these different kinds of stitches and symbols and so on. And are we to find all of those, the samples within this encyclopedia that you all have been working on?
All of the stitches are in the appendix of the encyclopedia, yes. And there are plans to put all of the stitches online for people, but I don't know how far that has gone.
Yes, that would be wonderful to be as a project to work on, and which takes us to a very important part of textiles within the Arab world, and mainly in Cairo, al-Khayamiyya. And I know a lot of people are fascinated by this. It's
a place I love. I've worked there for a couple of years. I miss going to the street, and I miss talking to the workmen there, the applique. And it was also part of this idea of what is embroidery. And we've taken embroidery as being a very umbrella term. So there is quilting in it, there's applique in it, there's patchwork in it, because often decorative stitching is mixed up with these other techniques as well. But the history of this street is totally amazing and shows just how important textiles are, and also how textiles travel. If you look at the picture, you can see the gallery on the first floor near the lights. That is actually where the tents were made. And this is the last street in Cairo where you can still see this. It was built, this whole complex, it's a shopping complex, a mall, that was built in about 1648. Wow. And it was designed by one of the ministers who had a palace at the far end of this street. And he was in charge of the Hajj. And so he built a shopping area where a pilgrim could buy absolutely anything he needed to go on Hajj. He got a percentage, but that's a different story. So you had the rope makers, you had the water bottle makers, you had the leather workers, and you had the tent makers who literally made the tents that were used by pilgrims going on Hajj. And the outside of the tents were white, but the inside had huge applique panels that were quick to make, could be rolled up, so that every time you stopped, you put your servants put your tent up, and the inside was decorated with these huge panels. And they no longer make the big tents, but the men, and it is men's work traditionally, and that's also another side of this idea that embroidery equals women, just not true. What is happening in the last 15, 20 years is that a lot of women are working from home because there are not enough men embroidering and doing the patchworks and the appliques. They have 2 jobs, 3 jobs. So women are doing it, but it's not acknowledged. So in public, it is men making the objects. But in general, if there's a lot of yellow in it, it tends to have been made by a woman. But it's not a hard and fast rule.
Why?
Different color ranges. Women like different colors.
Okay.
So there's a whole...
Sorry, I was going to ask, how does it connect with the I mean, my understanding of quilting, it's always made in a country that is cold, and it is by women, and they do it in winter time, and it's a communal sort of work. How does that relate to this?
You've got to make a difference between a quilt, American quilt, and quilting.
Mm-hmm.
Quilting goes
Okay.
back 2,500, 3,000 years. And some of the
Okay.
oldest surviving quilting comes from Central
Mhm.
Asia, and it's boots made out of felt. And some
Mm.
of them are lined with felt, and other ones have got felt with silk on them. And if you look at the Paseric textiles, which are 500 BC, there are rugs and covers which have wave designs in them that are quilted. So you really have to make this difference between the two. And at the moment, American quilts dominate people's perception of what is quilting. But it's very much older, and certainly in the medieval period in Sudan and Nigeria, quilting was used to make armor. And in fact, the armor was still being made until about 50 years ago, quilted armor for horses and for men. And there are wonderful descriptions in contemporary literature of the Sudanese or Nigerian warriors being so heavily covered, and this material so heavy, they have to be lifted up and hoisted onto their horses. And if they fall off, they can't move, just as a medieval knight in Europe in a metal suit of armor.
Yeah.
But quilted armor from Nigeria, etc., had the same problem. So, yeah. And actually, Egypt at night can be very cold.
The desert can be cold.
The desert can be very cold, yeah. So why not? And yes, we came back to this question about male and female embroideries. Is it domestic? Is it commissioned? As a generalization, if the work is carried out in public, it was done by men. And if there's direct money, commissioned money, it's done by men. But if it's for the household, for family, and for friends, it tended to be done by women. But that is changing because of the current economic situation, and more women are producing embroidery in public. And if you look at places like Bethlehem, then the embroiderers were professional women and have been for the last century.
Yes. So when it's commoditized, it is mainly men, but when it is done for the household and all of that, it's women. In the Gulf area, yes, but in the Gulf region nowadays as well, it's mainly men that work in that field and produce most of the embroidery work.
Yeah. So again, this concept of embroidery equals female. The other thing that we get an awful lot is, especially if you say look at Wikipedia on the history of embroidery, and so we spent a long time in the encyclopedia looking at the history, is according to Wikipedia, the oldest known embroidery is archaeological finds from China dating to 3rd, 4th century BC, when in fact the earliest that I know of comes from the tomb of Tutankhamun. So he died in about 1322 BC, and it's done in chain stitch and satin stitch and various others. So does that mean embroidery was invented in Egypt? I don't think so. It's something that develops all over the world in different levels and different styles. But what was interesting about the tomb of Tutankhamun is it's not just Egyptian embroidery found in the tomb. You also had Mitanni embroidery, which was far more sophisticated and used a far more range of stitches and designs. And that comes, the Mitanni are from northern Syria. So again, you're talking a huge international market, diplomatic, etc., for embroidery in a very early period.
Which brings us to this one, which is a fascinating slide. And I'd love for you to take everyone through it because it's so interesting.
A lot is known about the embroidery from Egypt and the Sudan from the medieval times, but very few people know in Lebanon, in the Kadisha Valley, there was a cave found some years ago, and a lot of objects in the cave, including skeletons and burials and a Bible. And it was dated to about 1284. And a lot of embroidered garments and fragments of embroidery. So these are late 13th century Lebanese embroidery. And they're claimed by some groups to be the forerunner of Palestinian, the forerunner of Levantine embroidery. And just looking at the range of designs and the range of color combinations, they're remarkable pieces. And yet very few people know of their existence. They were on display in the Lebanon, in the National Museum. I have no idea where they are now. I don't know what's happened to them.
Yes.
But these are a superb group of medieval Levantine, Middle Eastern embroideries, and deserve to be more well known. I love them.
How many other regional embroidery styles have you identified?
Regional, about 150. And I went through what can we find in Morocco, what is in Algeria, what is in Libya, what is in Tunisia, what is in Egypt, and approximately 150 recognizable types. And often or not, when you're talking, for example, about Palestinian embroidery, people will talk about Ramallah or Bethlehem. And yet, if you look at the whole country, going north to south, the diversity is enormous, and yet it's forgotten. And I still haven't understood why the attire garments have snakes on them. The curly S shape on the hem and just above the hem are snakes. But it's a characteristic of that particular type. And then Hebron, with the use of silks and applique and combined embroidery, woven textiles, is amazing and very heavy. But Isdud, totally different.
True. Very
so
true.
Even just one country, the diversity.
Yes, the variety. Yes,
yeah.
So true.
And if you look at countries, people don't associate Saudi Arabia with embroidery, and yet they have some beautiful and exquisite pieces. And again, a wide diversity of techniques. But also they have, because of the long-standing trade connections, and because of the Hajj, connections with India, Indonesia, all over the world. So some pieces, such as the red bridal dress that was made in 1984 for a royal wedding, was made in India for that particular wedding. The beading on the dresses, and with the thobe, the very big black one, that takes 35 meters at least of net.
Yes, we have one of those. Marjorie Ransom gifted us one, and it's the arms are so wide, it's unbelievable.
Isn't it just? And very elegant when worn properly. It just drowns me. But I've seen it being worn by somebody who's used to it, and the way they flash and the arm movement, it's gorgeous.
Yes.
And that is something that is so important with clothing, is it's often displayed statically. But in order to understand a garment, you need to see it in 3D, and you really need to have a person wear it so that it can be shown off to its best advantage. So it's a big problem curatorial wise, having that balance between, yes, don't put it flat on a wall, but it's the easiest way and the safest way for the garment, but you lose 50% of your understanding of it.
Very true.
Delicate balance, that one.
This is a very important piece.
I love this one. Heavily embroidered, very, very heavy little jacket, and the details on it look a bit crude when you look at it technically, but from a distance, it's amazing. And it's just one of those pieces that is comfortable, it works, and it's a bridal jacket from the Azir region of Saudi Arabia. And if I could take one home, I would probably take this one home.
Well, it's very unusual because people don't associate, especially nowadays, the dress of Saudi Arabia as being so colorful as you're showing it here.
Oh, that's the thing. People often talk about Saudi black and the outer coverings, but underneath the black abayas and everything, the color is fantastic. Another
Which
thing
takes
that
us
we,
to story. Yes,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
no, sorry, please. I'm muttering on.
I was going to say that stories are very part and parcel of what the work we are trying to do, or we are trying to implement as we collect and work on the pieces we have at the Zay. And you also have this notion, and you also work on that. And I wanted you to elaborate more on it.
Yeah. The stories behind the narratives, the context, and sometimes we tell people here that dress is a silent language that everybody speaks. And the problems are the many dialects. And if you don't understand it, you can't understand the messages. So you have to work hard at talking with people and trying to, okay, what does this mean? But like the spoken languages, meanings change over time. So you can't always pin it down. And so we were looking at, within the encyclopedia, urban clothing, village clothing, nomadic clothing, and the difference, say, between Bedouin culture and Tuareg culture, and how they use embroidery to show very different aspects of their lives and their cultures. And intangible cultural heritage is such an important part of textiles and clothing.
Yes.
So that's what this story was about.
And you are also concerned with identity, the issue of identity.
Dress and identity, absolutely. And people often presume that identity is ethnic identity, but it can be age, it can be gender, it can be sex, it can be occupation. A soldier wearing a uniform with big triangular shoulders to make himself look bigger. A nun is more rounded to show she's harmless, or in theory. So dress and identity, everybody is involved in it, from a baby to literally a corpse in one way or another. And it's one of the reasons why clothing is so important and so underestimated, because everybody's so used to clothing, they don't see it. And it's one of the problems we come across again and again and again, is people have this idea that clothing, dress and identity is about fashion, or it's about ethnic, the others. But in fact, it's about all of us. And it's also perceived as being a woman's subject, therefore not very important. Money for a train museum, a war museum, car museum, 5 million, 10 million for a painting, no problem. Clothing?
Yeah.
Dress? No, 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 no. We don't go down that road. And yet, today, I have never seen a naked politician.
That's so true. And carrying that notion forward, also marital status is part of the
marital
status.
Absolutely. A marital status is very important, looking at the women's clothing, but you also get it in men's clothing. So a child, a married woman from the Siwa, two very different forms and yet related. And then from the Oasis, two balot dresses, one for a married woman, and then with the green element for a widow. So without saying a word, you're telling a lot. And I like it with the nomadic dresses, the Bedouin ones, where you move from blue to red and back to blue and adding red again if you want to remarry. So unmarried red and going into the blue. I'm going all mad here, aren't I? Red, blue, red, blue, red. Sorry, my apologies. So a color combination saying who you are, what your identity is, and what your wishes for the future are.
Signals that you can give away just by what you are wearing,
Exactly.
which is wonderful.
And everybody's doing it. And as you were saying earlier on, within the Arab world, many different forms of religious identity. So Orthodox, Coptic, Syriac, Jewish, Druze, most groups have their own forms of I am through their clothing.
Mhm.
It's an important part of life.
And they also intersect, right?
Absolutely. And you get links and you get connections and you get, sometimes it's allowed and sometimes it's not allowed. And then as time goes on, things shift around. Yeah.
Which makes our work very hard.
But more fun. But yes. And people nowadays tend to forget how important the Ottoman influence was for 400 plus years within the Arab world. And in respect to the embroidery styles. So that central figure, the servant, is wearing Ottoman clothing, whereas the gentlemen are wearing Egyptian clothing, Arab clothing, to show status. It's a nice twist in that one.
Very
And the two little boys, basically, they're from Mecca. And basically their main clothing, the kaftans and the coat, are Ottoman. But if you look at the headwear, and the head is the most important part of the human body, then the boy is saying, I'm an Arab. I have a head rope on, a nakal. So look at my head, look at and a turban. We are Arabs. Forget the rest.
But, and you explained to me when we talked before that these were in the Ottoman style, but they were made most probably within Mecca or within Saudi Arabia.
Very distinct. There's a lot of, especially in the 19th century, and these are late 19th, these are from 1884, these photographs. Because of the wealth of Mecca, because of the Hajj, because of the great Meccan fair, the Hajj fair, there were a lot of embroiderers, weavers, tailors working in Mecca itself, making garments both for the merchants and for the courts.
Very interesting. And this one brings me to the point where we are now struggling with what they term cultural appropriation. And it's an issue that is coming back again and again and discussed quite a lot. And we get a lot of comments about that within the Instagram and social media.
Yeah.
So, and you had your comments, I mean, you had your point of view about that. So maybe I thought it would be nice if you could share it with everyone.
What many people are talking about is cultural misappropriation, where especially the large companies, the fashion designers, take a form and then use it and sell it at vast amounts. Yes. But what has happened for centuries, for thousands of years, literally, ideas have traveled, textiles have traveled, objects have traveled, and any good craftsperson will see an object and say, oh, I like that idea. Yes, I'm going to use that. I like that pattern. I like that shape. So what is more important, I think, is adopt and adapt, being honest about it and acknowledging, yes, you saw this fantastic item and it inspired you. And to deny that is to take away literally thousands of years of human development, human artistic development, and cultural heritage. And to say you cannot is wrong. And that
so
sad.
If I may ask a question then, just for the sake of argument, there are many wedding dresses that look very Ottoman in style, but they are Palestinian. So what do you consider? Is it a Palestinian dress or is it an Ottoman dress?
We have this problem constantly when cataloguing items for our collection. It's made in India, it's worn in Lebanon, but it ended up, where does it come from? So we put both. And we say it's a Palestinian garment that is made out of Ottoman cloth, or it is in the Ottoman style. And we acknowledge both forms because it's part of its history. You can't deny it.
When you look at something similar to that jacket that is worn by the servant that you pointed out, with all that embroidery work, which immediately you would recognize as Ottoman. And you see so many similar samples of this all over North Africa, all over the Levant area as well. So again, do we acknowledge that they are both cultures?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah.
And it's not cultural appropriation, it's adopt and adapt.
Yes.
Which makes much more sense.
I agree. Which takes us to this one, and it's a wonderful way of adapting that you explained to me. And I think our audience would be very interested in understanding it as well.
I've actually come across a bit more information. And what these garments are, well, embroideries from the northern Sinai. And the Bedouin women love bright colors, the light, coming back to that. But in the 1940s and 50s, it was a question of a lot of these people were moved into the Delta region of Egypt. And those that settled in that area changed, adopted and adapted their clothing and the colors they used, so it wasn't so obvious that they were Bedouin. So you have the same designs, but more muted. They become blue. But what I've just heard from somebody else is that the women and the groups that remained as nomads, but living in Damietta and living in the Delta region, but stayed as nomads, they continued making red embroidery.
They didn't assimilate.
They didn't want to assimilate. So the blue assimilated, the red did not. So again, sending messages internally and externally about who you are and how you want to live. Fascinating.
This is another one, because again, we've come across this shawl all around, and it's such a difficult, notion of trying to figure out where it comes from, who does it really belong to, and what kind of, what is it trying to say?
It doesn't belong to anybody. Well, what it is this is now classed by some as typically Bethlehem garment with the shawl over the tall headdress. And this photograph actually was made in Widad Kawa's garden, using part of Widad's collection. But the shawl actually is made in China, Cantonese, and was an export wear in the 19th century, made in vast quantities. And it became very popular in Europe, but also in the Middle East. And the one, the purplish one, actually is from Morocco and designed for the Moroccan market. But at the same time, in the late 19th century, early 20th century, a lot of Palestinian men went to South America, where they found the Spanish women wearing Chinese shawls. So they took Chinese shawls back to Palestine, where it became part of the Palestinian dress, or the Bethlehem dress and outfit. So you have China, Morocco, South America, Palestine, Europe, Western, everybody. People are enjoying it, adopting, adapting, and in some cases, acknowledging. And this is what it's about.
Yes. A very similar thing is happening nowadays in the early 90s. It was happening when the abaya, the black abaya that was exported from Saudi Arabia into Egypt and into the rest of the areas of the Gulf. The same similar sort of thing, people coming in, visiting or working, and then taking it back as presents and using it, and then it becomes part and parcel of everyday wear.
Yes, exactly. And that's how it happens. And if you want another classic example, pajamas, which are actually Indian, that came over 18th century into Europe and became a standard form of nightwear. Even the word pajama isn't English. It happens all over the place and all over time, and it is not in one direction, it's all directions.
I used this just so that we would discuss a point. I know it is not your favorite question, and that's why I didn't choose a particular image to represent it, but what is your favorite, if you want, or what are you most intrigued by?
I hate that question. Basically, I'm most intrigued. What I like is the piece I'm working on at any particular moment, because then I start finding the stories out, the story behind it, and then I become more and more interested. But my favorite, the embroidery I am most intrigued about, that I think if you have to class a piece of embroidery as Arab, and the Arab embroidery, with a long history, a political, religious, technical, multicultural element to it, it must absolutely be the Kiswas, the Mecca.
Here we go.
It can't be any other. To me, that's the most important living tradition of embroidery in the world. And I'm not just saying it for you.
Yeah, it's such a fascinating one. I'm very much interested in it too. And I would love if for us, I mean, we can do a whole webinar on just this topic.
Absolutely.
But I was thinking maybe we can give a small brief to, or a teaser, so that our audience would be interested in coming again for a much wider webinar on this subject.
Well, the Kiswa is the center of Mecca, and the Kaaba is covered once a year with a large covering, literally, which is made up of meters and meters and meters of cloth, which is woven with inscriptions in it. It is, in fact, a pre-Islamic tradition, and there are examples and written descriptions from the 4th century and earlier, I suspect, of textiles being placed upon shrines in Mecca, and often from Yemen. By the 7th, 8th century, it's becoming standardized. Mm-hmm. And as part of the politics, by the medieval period, you're having 3 different kiswas being made: the Ottoman, the Damascus, and the Egyptian one. And it's all to do with who is ruling and who has the power. And whoever covers the Kaaba has a great deal of power. And in the beginning, it was a small amount of embroidery, just a band around the top and the cover to the main door. But as time has gone on, more and more and more embroidery has been added. And there is, you can date illustrations by the amount of embroidery on it. And it was so important that in the 1920s, Saudi Arabia said no more foreign kiswa. It has to be made in Saudi Arabia. It then changed, and then in the 60s, there's a permanent workshop was set up, purely and utterly for making the embroidery and for making the kiswa. And that stays in Saudi Arabia and says, this is Saudi, this is ours. And I would love a piece of it. I have hung my nose over that for years. It's very unlikely to happen. But it's such an important embroidery and so little known outside of, well, it's people see the image and says, oh yes, but once you know the history of it, it's amazing.
And how about touching a little bit on the issue of color? Some people think it was always black, or others, yeah. we know we have different colors of textiles.
No, in the early versions, it was actually quite a range of colors. It was a Ubid black when everything went black, and then it stayed. But different groups have been making different colors to say it's from Syria, it's from Ottoman, it's from Egypt. At one point, one of the Mughal emperors tried in India to make the kiswa and send it, and he produced a yellow version, and that was just not accepted. It was refused, but that was a power play. So color plays an important part, and the embroidery, especially the embroidery on the door, the Veil of Fatima, it's the nickname. So the door covering is the most heavily embroidered, and it states the name of the person who ordered the kiswah to be made. So staking a claim to, this is mine, I made it, this is for my country, my group.
Does it still have the name
Yes.
while it's being made in Saudi?
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I will check that. As far as I am aware, yes, but I think we better check that detail.
And if it was made in Cairo, it would be made in that street that we spoke about.
Part of the embroidery was made in that street, part of it was made elsewhere, but it was made up in the long lengths that are of silk that are covering were put together in the Street of the Tent Makers in the long gallery that you can still see.
Which brings us to another question that I wanted to ask, and it is, in your opinion, what is the future of embroidery in the region?
Oh, that's a difficult one.
Regional identity.
It's regional identity, and with internet and globalization, that's smudging. War, embroidery takes materials, it takes time, it takes patience, it takes peace. And the other major problem at the moment are cheap imports from places like China. The local people cannot compete with this. So again, we wrote the encyclopedia to get as many basic pieces of information down as possible so that future generations have it. And it may be that for 1-2 generations, especially given what's happened in Syria, in Yemen, embroidery won't be produced, but at least the knowledge of what it is and what it means is there. Yeah. Talking of Yemen, a few years ago, the Yemen ambassador to the Netherlands actually asked us if we would become a cultural ark for Yemen textiles and clothing, especially, well, including the embroidery. And they were asking various institutes throughout the world if they will become cultural arks and help preserve knowledge of this culture in safe places. So we agreed to do textiles and clothing. And try and get as much information out there. Our website is open access. We don't charge. We do ask people to acknowledge, but preserve your culture, get it online, get it available to people. Let's share it and protest saying, come on, this, while we have the opportunity, while there are still people who understand, let's get information out there so that future generations can enjoy it as much as we are.
So as we come to the end of this session, I have 2 questions before we open the floor to others. And I know I could see there are over 50 questions over there in front of me. But, yes, but I wanted to know, what is the future for TRC, Textile Research Centre? And first, before saying that, please can we inform everyone how many articles of clothing or textiles that you have within your collection, because it's unbelievable.
You have to remember it was never the intention, but it just sort of happened. We have nearly 35,000 textiles, garments and accessories online. And literally every week we get donations from people. We're putting online about 100 items a week at the moment, and it's just going to get busier and busier. Our main problem is lack of structural funding and lack of space. If we can solve that, then the things we're going to do. In the meantime, well, we want to set up a textile artisan centre so that all of these crafts can be taught, as well as the history of the crafts and the history of textiles and dress in general, so that, again, everybody can share it. And as part of this work, especially with Bloomsbury, we're doing this series of encyclopedias of embroidery. Originally, it was going to be 7. It's now 8 volumes because we're finding out so many details and information. So the one for Central Asia came out at the beginning of this year. Sub-Saharan Africa will come out next year. And we're currently working on Scandinavia and Western Europe. And then it will be Central Europe and Southeast Asia and South Asia as well, and the Americas. We want to share our love of textiles, dress, jewelry, accessories with the whole world. So yeah, we're making a plea. Please help us. We're going to continue because we're irritating Northern women. We're stubborn, which I suspect we share with the Arab women as well. Well, with all women, actually, we can be quite stubborn. But I do think our future is women for women, because many, many men, especially those who are holding the purse strings, well, they don't realize the importance of what they're wearing.
Mm. Which brings me to my second question. You have watched us, nurtured us, and supported us. How do you evaluate what we are doing, and how do you see the ZAY initiative?
I'm envious of your, well,
it's the other way around, Dr. Gillian.
No, you're getting out there, you're talking with people, you're showing things. I think it's important working together. We are more the historical collection curatorial side. You have an amazing way of talking with people and presenting. I am envious of, I can't do all of the computer things. And it's, oh, come to Leiden, woman. That's all I can say.
Yes, I have to make that trip.
Yeah, I think between us, we'll conquer the world. Oh. But I need you and you need me. We complement each other, absolutely. And that's the great thing about it.
Well, what an absolutely fabulous hour. I've been completely transformed, and I remembered what I had to do and ask some Q&A. But there have been so many Q&A in from the audience. I am 100% not going to get through them all, everyone. But I'll just pick a couple. And I hope to see many of you on behind the scenes with Dr. Gillian and Dr. Reem directly following when we press end of webinar to have a more further conversation with Dr. Gillian. And I also promise you that we will get a session later on in the year, another session with Dr. Gillian. So there we go. Dr. Gillian, I've just committed you to that.
Thank you.
First of all, very quick from Hafer. Please let us know how to get the encyclopedia as it's sold out on Amazon.
Go to Bloomsbury London, to their website. It's for sale there.
Bloomsbury London.
Or if you're in America, then go to Bloomsbury, New York. Bloomsbury Publishing.
Everyone, I've put it in the chat, so hopefully that will help you.
Bloomsbury, yes. Bloomsbury.
Oh, sorry, yeah. Typing and talking all at the same time. There we go.
Yeah.
I have all your books and I refer to them all the time when working on my embroidery. I'm specifically interested in Syrian traditional dresses. I own a Sukna dress and a Marat Newman dress.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have practical information about these dresses? Do they use waste canvas? And which type of thread do they use?
From what I've seen, they used whatever was available. So a lot of people tended to go for the DMC. If you could afford it, you went for DMC, the French threads. Those were the top. And in many cases, they used not the mercerized version, but the perlé version. Not always. So you got to just see what the garments were. In the very early versions, floss silk was used.
Wow.
Yeah. So from about the 1800s to about 1920, floss silk, 1920s perlé, cottons, and then more modern times, say the last 50 years, DMC mercerized, or similar quantities, because DMC got themselves into trouble. And so Egyptian forms and Syrian forms of these types of threads started to being produced.
Wonderful. From an archaeological point of view, what conditions allow textiles to survive?
Dry conditions of Egypt. And then some of the textiles, say in the tomb of Tutankhamun, in the part of the tomb, totally perfect condition as if they were made yesterday, but where water came into the tomb, they were in a very poor condition. And most people don't realize, but the largest single group of objects from the tomb of Tutankhamun were the clothing he wore and the textiles associated with him. Over 400 textiles and garments in the tomb.
Wow.
But who knows about them? Everybody's heard about the gold mask and the chariots. And yet the most important group were the clothing. Crazy.
Yeah.
Indeed.
That's another talk I can give one day.
You're committing yourself to that.
No.
How often is a
Years.
kiswa made? Did I say that properly? Kiswa.
Once a year.
Once a
It's
year.
made every year. And normally they make 2 of them, just in case. And they cost somewhere in the region of 11 to 15 million to make.
11 to 15 million
Dollars.
dollars. Okay, US dollars. Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge investment. And it's after it's been up for 1 year in the sand, in the heat and the things, it's removed, cut up, given as diplomatic gifts, and then a new one is put there. Every
Wow.
year.
What happens to the kiswa once it, what is it?
It's pilgrims want pieces of it. And the government now takes the embroidery and it's given as diplomatic gifts, and sometimes it's sold.
We have many of those, and we have one piece in our collection.
Yeah, I don't have a single piece.
Yeah,
If I'm going to have to drool over something, it's having a piece of that.
I have to show it to you. Yes.
It's just such an amazing story. It really is. It's fantastic.
True.
Wow. Well, this whole webinar has been absolutely fantastic. And it's been so wonderful to have you with us, Dr. Gillian, our creative advisor, and somebody that we always use as a wonderful sounding board, for which I'm truly, truly, truly grateful. So thank you.
My pleasure.
Now, as the summer holidays, whatever they entail for us, Dr. Reem has now made it from Dubai to London over the last few weeks. Hence, we've been a little bit quiet over here in the Zay. And I'm going to try a similar journey in a few weeks' time. However, over the summer, so you don't get upset that you don't hear from Dr. Reem and I, we have some lovely podcasts that we're going to launch. They are called The Zay in My Closet. So when you get a little email from Dr. Reem or I or Catherine or any of the team saying, come on, take part, we are basically going to pick lots of people from across the Arab world to do the Zay in My Closet. And basically what we want to know and let all our wonderful community know is about different parts of the world and what dresses they still have from their heritage, from their childhood and memories of dress. So we'll be launching that over the next couple of weeks. We really look forward to that. We also have a very special talk on, Dr. Reem, please help me here, on Tuesday, the 13th of July, with Richard Wilding who wrote the book Mansujat, and is a photographer. And it's going to be a 90-minute session. So it's not part of our traditional series, but sign up in the traditional way. The link should be with your recording of this session directly sort of tomorrow. So fingers crossed we'll be able to send you all those details. Anyway, for anyone still to hear more, we really look forward to seeing you on behind the scenes in the next couple of minutes. Oh, and
yes, I want to put in one more word, and that is, I think it's very important Sitwidad is going to host a webinar on Saturday, the 3rd of July. And I wanted everyone to know about it because they are going to be discussing Syrian glory and textiles and dress. They have an exhibition on the matter now at the Tiras Center, Widad Qawar's house. And although it is not our event, but because we believe in the work she does, she is one of our creative advisors, and we wanted to support this, and I wanted to bring it to the attention of our audience. Dr. Gillian, thank you so much for this. I really appreciate it. And if they allow me to fly, I'm happy to come and spend a weekend with you, at least to catch up and learn.
Anything can happen in this world at the moment.
Yes, inshallah. And for our audience, thank you very much for all your support throughout this whole year. And I look forward to seeing you again in September. Look for the podcasts, as Emma said, especially since we're having them with young influencers and bloggers and younger audience, that is, so that we will learn from them and to reach out to them, because they are the future. And it will be wonderful if we can get them to be subscribe to this notion of preserving culture and heritage.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Dr. Gillian, Dr. Reem, thank you. And I look forward to joining up with you all a little bit later on. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night.